Maxwell Bennett stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 47th floor of the Bennett Financial Tower in Manhattan. Rain pelted the glass, creating shifting patterns that mirrored the turmoil in his mind. At 42, he had everything society told him would bring fulfillment. CEO position at his family's investment firm, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of luxury cars, and a Black American Express card with no limit. Yet, as he adjusted his hand-tailored Brioni suit and glanced at the Forbes magazine on his desk featuring his own face on the cover, Maxwell felt only emptiness. The headline read, "America's Most Ruthless CEO, How Maxwell Bennett Built a $4.7 billion Empire." The article praised his cutthroat acquisition strategies and legendary 18-hour workdays, but failed to mention the cost: 2 failed marriages, estrangement from his teenage daughter Sophia, and the panic attacks that had begun to strike without warning. "Mr. Bennett, the board is waiting in the conference room," his assistant's voice interrupted through the intercom. "Tell them I'll be right there," Maxwell replied, swallowing another antacid tablet. The acquisition of Rivera Technologies was supposed to be the crown jewel of his career, a hostile takeover that would add another billion to the company's value and silence his father's lingering criticisms from beyond the grave. Old man Bennett had never believed Maxwell had what it took to expand the empire. Today would prove him wrong once and for all. As Maxwell gathered his presentation materials, his phone buzzed with a text from his doctor. "Test results in. Need to discuss urgently. Please call." He silenced the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Whatever it was could wait. Nothing would interfere with today's triumph. In the boardroom, Maxwell moved with practiced precision through his presentation, watching board members nod with approval at the projected profit margins. Halfway through explaining the layoffs necessary to streamline Rivera's operations, a sharp pain shot through his chest. He loosened his tie, trying to appear casual as cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "Are you all right, Max?" asked Victoria Winters, the only board member who still called him by his childhood nickname. "Never better," he lied, reaching for his water glass. As his fingers closed around it, the room began to spin. The last thing Maxwell saw before collapsing was the shocked expressions of 12 board members and the spreadsheet still projected. On the wall, a spreadsheet showing the 3,000 employees who would lose their jobs when he was finished. The ambulance sirens wailed as paramedics rushed him through Manhattan traffic. "BP dropping," one shouted. "Mr. Bennett, stay with us." As darkness closed in, Maxwell had a single, startling thought. Not a single person in that boardroom actually cared if he lived or died. They only cared about the stock price. Stress-induced cardiomyopathy, Dr. Elaine Shun explained 3 days later, commonly called broken heart syndrome. Maxwell stared at her from his hospital bed. "That's not a real thing." "I assure you it is," she replied, adjusting her glasses. "Your heart has been weakened by chronic stress. The collapse was a warning. Next time could be fatal." The room felt suddenly small, the beeping monitors too loud. Maxwell Bennett wasn't accustomed to being vulnerable. His empire had been built on never showing weakness, on pushing through pain, on winning at all costs. "So prescribe something," he said dismissively. "I have a company to run." Dr. Chan's expression remained firm. "This isn't something a pill can fix, Mr. Bennett. Your body is telling you to make fundamental changes. Take time away from work. Reconnect with what matters. Find balance." A bitter laugh escaped him. "That's your medical advice? Find balance? It's that or prepare your will," she replied bluntly. "I've seen too many executives like you leave this hospital in body bags because they wouldn't listen." That afternoon, his daughter Sophia visited, awkwardly perching on the edge of his hospital bed. At 17, she was nearly a stranger to him, having lived with her mother since the divorce 10 years earlier. Her visit surprised him. They hadn't spoken in months. "Mom said you almost died," she said, fidgeting with her bracelet. "Your mother exaggerates," Maxwell replied automatically. Sophia's eyes, so like her mother's, flashed with anger. "Can you just be real for once? You know what I thought when she told me? I thought about how I barely know my own father. How messed up is that?" Her words struck harder than any physical pain. Before Maxwell could respond, his phone rang. The office calling for the 12th time that day. Sophia stood abruptly. "Don't worry, I know the drill. Business first." She walked to the door, then paused. "By the way, I got accepted to Berkeley. Full scholarship, not that you asked." As the door closed behind her, Maxwell let the phone continue ringing. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, remembering something his grandmother used to say, "At the end, nobody wishes they'd spent more time at the office." That night, alone in his hospital room, Maxwell made a decision that would change everything. He reached for his phone, but instead of calling the office, he dialed a number he hadn't used in 15 years. The coastal village of Sandpoint was exactly as Maxwell remembered it from his college summers, quaint, unhurried, and blissfully disconnected from the frantic pulse of Manhattan. Here, on Oregon's rugged coastline, he had once dreamed different dreams before his father's expectations and his own ambition had recharted his course. "I still can't believe you called me," said Thomas Reeves, his college roommate, as they walked along the beach. The morning fog was lifting, revealing tide pools and driftwood sculptures created by local artists. 15 years of radio silence. Then suddenly you want to stay in my guest house indefinitely? Maxwell watched a sandpiper dart along the shore. "I should have called sooner." "Yes, you should have," Thomas agreed without bitterness. Unlike Maxwell, he had chosen a different path after graduation, opening a small architecture firm specializing in sustainable design, marrying his college sweetheart, raising 2 children in this seaside community. His life was modest by Maxwell's standards, yet Thomas's easy laughter and the genuine warmth in his home had shaken Maxwell deeply. "My board thinks I'm at an exclusive rehabilitation center in Switzerland," Maxwell confessed. "My assistant is the only one who knows the truth. She's forwarding essential communications, but otherwise ... He gestured at the vast Pacific. "I'm officially off the grid." Thomas studied his old friend. "And what exactly are you hoping to find here, Max?" A question hung between them, carried by the salt breeze. Maxwell had no answer. His first week in Sandpoint passed in a blur of sleep and solitude. He ignored emails, silenced his phone, and spent hours watching the ocean from the deck of Thomas's guest house. The panic attacks subsided, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar emptiness that wasn't entirely unpleasant, like a canvas wiped clean. On the 8th day, restlessness drove him into town. At the local farmers' market, amid stands selling organic produce and artisanal goods, Maxwell felt conspicuously out of place in his designer casual wear. He paused at a booth displaying handcrafted leather goods, running his fingers over a simple wallet. Most people just pick them up, not perform a full tactile analysis. Said an amused voice. Maxwell looked up into the most striking pair of green eyes he'd ever seen. The woman behind the table smiled at him, sun-freckled skin, auburn hair gathered in a messy bun, hands strong and calloused from her craft. "Claire Winters," she said, extending her hand. "New around here?" "Maxwell Bennett," he replied automatically, then winced at his formal tone. "I mean Max, just Max." Her handshake was firm. "Well, just Max. What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" For the first time in months, perhaps years, Maxwell felt something unexpected, a genuine desire. To engage, to connect. Not for business advantage or social climbing, but simply because this woman's smile had cracked something open inside him. "I'm not entirely sure yet," he answered honestly. "But I think I might be starting over." Claire's smile widened. "In my experience, those are the best kinds of beginnings." 3 months into his sabbatical, Maxwell's phone erupted with urgent messages. Victoria Winters, the board member who had witnessed his collapse, had traveled to Sandpoint to find him. "The Rivera deal is imploding," she explained over coffee. At the local diner, Maxwell noticed how out of place she looked in her Chanel suit among the flannel-clad locals. "Harrison is moving to oust you. Claims you've abandoned your responsibilities." Maxwell surprised himself by asking, "What about the employees at Rivera?" Victoria blinked. "What about them?" "The 3,000 people we planned to lay off." "Already done," she replied. "Severance packages were minimal, as you'd specified." The news settled heavily. 3,000 lives appended while he'd been walking barefoot on beaches, helping Thomas with his sustainable housing project, and spending evenings at Claire's workshop learning the basics of leatherworking. He'd even spoken with Sophia twice. Awkward conversations that nonetheless ended with tentative plans for her to visit over Christmas break. "You need to come back," Victoria insisted. "Your father built this company from nothing. Are you really willing to watch it get dismantled?" The mention of his father struck a familiar chord of obligation. Maxwell had spent his entire adult life trying to earn the approval of a man who'd been dead for 5 years. "I'll think about it," he promised. After Victoria left, Maxwell walked to Claire's workshop. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved from friendship to something deeper. Claire, divorced with a 10-year-old son, had shown Maxwell a different kind of success, one measured in creativity, authenticity, and presence rather than profit margins. "Your real life is calling?" Claire asked when he told her about Victoria's visit. There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. "I don't know what my real life is anymore," Maxwell admitted. Claire took his hands in hers. "When I left my corporate job in Seattle, everyone told me I was committing career suicide. Maybe I was, but I've never regretted choosing a life that lets me be present for what matters." That night, Maxwell couldn't sleep. The pull of his former life was strong, not just the wealth and power, but the identity he'd constructed. Who was Maxwell Bennett, if not the ruthless CEO? What was his purpose, if not the expansion of his empire? At dawn, he walked to the beach and stood at the water's edge. For the first time in decades, he removed his shoes and socks, digging his toes into the cool sand. The sensation was both foreign and deeply familiar, a memory from childhood, before spreadsheets and acquisitions had consumed his existence. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from the office. This time, Maxwell answered. The Bennett Financial Tower hadn't changed, but Maxwell had. He strode through the lobby in a suit that still fit his frame, but felt like a costume. Employees stared as he passed, whispering behind cupped hands about his appearance, the tan, the relaxed posture, the subtle changes they couldn't quite name. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. Harrison Collins, his CFO and the architect of the attempted coup, sat in Maxwell's chair at the head of the table. "Maxwell," Harrison greeted coolly. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," Maxwell replied, taking a seat not at the head but along the side of the table. The action itself was a statement that didn't go unnoticed. For 2 hours, Maxwell listened as the board detailed the company's status. The Rivera acquisition had proceeded, but employee morale had plummeted. Productivity was down. 3 key executives had resigned. The stock had fallen 7% when they finished. All eyes turned to him, expecting the old Maxwell, the one who would demand solutions, assign blame, perhaps fire someone on the spot to reinstate the culture of fear that had driven there Success. Instead, he asked, what would happen if we reinstated the positions at Rivera? Not all 3,000, but the essential ones? Harrison scoffed. We'd lose millions in projected savings. And gain what in innovation? Institutional knowledge. Community goodwill? The board members exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the Maxwell Bennett they knew. I've had time to reflect, Maxwell continued. Our strategies have prioritized short-term gains over sustainable growth. We valued shareholder returns over the well-being of our employees and the communities we impact. This doesn't sound like you, Victoria observed. Maxwell smiled slightly. No, it doesn't. Not the me you knew. What followed was the most contentious board meeting in the company's history. Maxwell proposed a radical restructuring, not to cut costs, but to realign priorities, ethical investment practices, employee profit sharing, reduced work weeks, community reinvestment initiatives. You've lost your mind, Harrison declared. The shareholders will revolt. Perhaps, Maxwell acknowledged, or perhaps they'll recognize that the business model of the future isn't ruthless extraction, but meaningful contribution. The vote was narrow, but with Victoria's surprising support, Maxwell's vision prevailed. As the stunned board members filed out, Victoria lingered. Your father would have hated every minute of this, she said. Maxwell nodded. Yes, he would have. But I think he would have respected it, she added unexpectedly. He built this company his way. Now you're rebuilding. It's yours. That evening, Maxwell called Claire from his penthouse, feeling the striking contrast between the luxury surrounding him and the simple warmth of their conversations. I miss you, he said, watching the city lights below. But I need to finish what I've started here. I know, Claire replied. Some journeys have to be completed, not abandoned. And us? He asked. The question weighted with uncertainty. We're a journey too, Max, not a destination. For the first time in his life, Maxwell felt the future opening before him not as a battle, to be won, but as a path to be traveled with intention. 1 year later, Maxwell stood barefoot on the polished concrete floor of the company's new headquarters. The Bennett Foundation occupied the former warehouse district by the river, an open, light-filled space where executives shared the same floor as entry-level employees. Living walls of plants purified the air, and large windows eliminated the need for artificial lighting during daylight hours. The transformation hadn't been without casualties. Harrison and several board members had resigned in protest. Some shareholders had sold their stakes. The company had contracted, becoming smaller but more focused, more deliberate in its investments. Dad, check this out. Called Sophia, now a sophomore at Berkeley, and interning in the Foundation's environmental initiative. The reconciliation with his daughter had been gradual, fragile at first, strengthening with each honest conversation. She showed him preliminary designs for a sustainable housing project in a neighborhood where Bennett Financial had once foreclosed on hundreds of homes during the financial crisis. What do you think? She asked, her enthusiasm palpable. I think Thomas will approve, Maxwell replied, referring to his friend whose architectural firm had partnered with the foundation. It honors the community rather than replacing it. The phrase captured Maxwell's evolving philosophy, both personal and professional. He divided his time now, 3 weeks in New York, 1 week in Sandpoint. The arrangement wasn't perfect, but it allowed him to integrate the parts of himself that had once seemed irreconcilable. Later that afternoon, he conducted a meeting with his executive team not in a boardroom, but while walking the riverside path outside the building. His cardiologist had approved the practice enthusiastically. The quarterly results show we're stabilizing, reported Victoria, now cool after Maxwell had recognized her hidden talents for operational excellence rather than just financial strategy. The Rivera division is actually outperforming projections. Since the reintegration program, Maxwell nodded, noticing a great blue heron fishing at the river's edge. Such details would have escaped his notice in his previous life of spreadsheets and screens. That evening, he boarded his private jet, one of the few luxuries he'd maintained, bound for Oregon. Claire waited at the small regional airport, her truck parked haphazardly, as always. They embraced without words, the separation of weeks dissolving in moments. "How's City Max?" she asked as they drove along the coastal highway toward Sandpoint. "Evolving," he replied, "and eager to become Coastal Max again." At Claire's workshop, now expanded to employ 3 local artisans, Maxwell changed from his business attire into jeans and a simple Henley. Her son Dylan looked up from his homework to give Maxwell a fist bump, another relationship carefully cultivated over months of genuine presence. Later, they walked along the beach at sunset, the Pacific stretching endlessly before them. Claire's hand fit perfectly in his, their fingers intertwined like their lives had become. "I got the investors for the artisan cooperative," Claire said. 10 local craftspeople will have studio space by spring." "That's wonderful," Maxwell replied, genuinely proud of her success. So different from the acquisitions and mergers that had once been his measure of achievement. They stopped to watch the horizon, where the sun met the sea in a blaze of color. Maxwell felt the cool sand between his toes, the ocean breeze on his face, Claire's warmth beside him. The competing poles of his dual existence, Manhattan power broker and Barefoot, coastal dweller, had gradually transformed from conflict into complement. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked. "The changes you made?"